So yeah, just catching up with Apex Zero. How's things, man?
Yeah,
Good?
I'm good, man. I'm blessed, man. I'm blessed.
So I want to know, like, what's your family background? Where's your heritage come from?
You know what I mean? Well, I'm mixed. So my mum's side is Nottingham in the Midlands, but my nan was of Irish descent still. And then on my dad's side, obviously, you know what I mean, we're African, you know what I mean, I consider myself to be African, you know what I mean, but via Grenada, you know what I mean, in the Caribbean, with the history of everything that happened to our people, that's where that branch of my family tree came from, through Africa through Grenada to the UK, you know what I mean, so yeah, still got love for Grenada, always got love for Grenada still.
So it's got quite a colourful history. Like it's shown some video clips and wow, I didn't even know it went down like that there.
Yeah, no, it's an important history. Do you know what I mean? It's one of them things that it gets glossed over far too much. Like a lot of countries around the world, is sort of. But yeah, you know what I mean. The original people are there. The indigenous people were the Arawaks and the Caribs. Sort of. Throughout history, before the conquistadors and Columbus and then murderers turned up on the scene, that was the indigenous people, and they sort of had their own conflicts and their own problems with each other and had it. But I think the Arawaks came first, and then the Caribs took the land from them. But then, yeah, after post Columbus, you know what I mean, it was a slave port and a big place of plantation slavery was big there. For nutmeg is the major crop there. It's one of the only countries. I think there's 3 countries in the world, and Grenada is the biggest producer. I think, apart from maybe Indonesia, of nutmeg, sugar, all other different types of things. Cocoa was what it was used for. But then after, you know what I mean, our people gained a certain type of freedom, you know what I mean? This is where I see it, you know what I mean? When slavery ended, different form of slavery started, you know what I'm saying? So, yeah, I get in the sort of 20th century, sort of 60s, 70s, there was a bad, not sort of strictly a dictator, but man by the name of Gary was in the pocket of Thatcher and Reagan and these devils, you know what I mean? And yeah, there was an uprising against it. People weren't taking it, and led by a brother called Maurice Bishop. There was a revolution in Grenada that overthrew the dictatorship, and it was almost bloodless. There was a few casualties, as there always is in these processes. But in terms of history and how violent and how bloody some revolutions can be, this was a nearly bloodless coup. Took control of it. Gary fled with the help of his friends. You know what I mean? And then, yeah, it was like they had control of the country, started doing really positive moves for the people, you know what I mean, putting power and putting land back into people who needed it, redistributing wealth, building up, a lot of work went into building up the self-esteem of women, and sort of, there was a department that would go through all the laws and change the laws from it being, you know, where general laws in England now, they'll say things like everything is he, and they went through in every law and made it gender neutral to make sure to encourage it to not just be a patriarchal society. And all just sort of subtle things like this were major differences that were big for the revolution in Grenada. But then, yeah, like, you know what I mean, a matter of days into the revolution, America sent over its you know what I mean, convoy, and basically said to them, it's been documented that Maurice Bishop said he had his meeting with the American Secretary of State, and he said, we're the biggest advocates of freedom, but we will take the freedom of anyone who we feel is jeopardizing our freedom. So with that said, you know what I mean, went in, infiltration techniques as usual. Maurice Bishop was killed as a result of these things, and yeah, a big war, like, you know what I mean, an important war happened. The Cubans, as it was the revolutionary government, were socialist, aligned themselves, wanted to sort of create a sort of pan-Caribbean link with countries like Guyana and Cuba, to form alliances in positive socialist ways. America saw that as a threat. Cuba sent over help, and the plane was shot down. The Cuban plane was shot down, and it's still there today in the old airport in Grenada. And yeah, it was you know, a massive giant world superpower going to war with a tiny island with, you know what I mean, the population of, till today is 110,000, it was less then, and just took over, put the old dictator back in power with more protection, and you know what I mean, we're still sort of dealing with the repercussions of that today. And like a lot of sort of countries who haven't got the sort of military strength to defend themselves, not in, like, you know, in the same way that Cuba or the same way that somewhere like Venezuela, they do have that kind of power. It was just sort of put back into the pocket of the West, and you know, as I say, we're still dealing with that now. But you know, it's a beautiful place. The people there are wonderful. I've been there a few times. I mean, the big percentage of my family is still there, and I love it there. It's just, you know, in the world, in the scheme of things, the large scheme of things, I still consider us to be African people, and there's an indigenous struggle that happens all over the Americas that is not given enough attention. You know, a lot of people talk about Latinos and Latinas and brown power, and it's an important thing, but a lot of brothers and sisters I know who are fighting that cause, you know, it's not about dividing people between North and South America. All of that is one landmass, and it's a varied culture, you know, from the Incas and the Mayans and the Tainos and the Cherokees, all these different mix of indigenous people. It's their continent, you know what I mean? And I feel like as African people, you know, a big way that we could aim to help them is doing the things that the Rasta movement were trying to do and repatriate to Africa. But then again, that opens a whole different amount of sort of problems, whereas with Liberia, the historical case of Liberia, you can't take someone's land away from them and give it back to someone else just because you consider your birthright to be African. You know what I mean? You know, you don't ever want to create a situation like what's going on in Israel, where some people who decide this is their land goes in with the help of all the superpowers in the world and take away from the indigenous. You know, even though we are indigenous to Africa, same way, it's about creating links with the African people who are there and recognizing ourselves as African and trying to create a situation where we can integrate back into African society in a way that will help, you know, a Pan-African movement that will help boost up Africa as a continent. And I don't mean in terms of developing along a capitalist way or along a sort of westernized way, but a way that is like what Frantz Fanon said: we shouldn't just be caught between communism and capitalism. These were made by other men of other eras and other times and other continents. You know, I'm talking about creating a new way of living that benefits African people in the diaspora, to me, that encourages us to go back to our roots, you know, but in a way that's inclusive, you know, inclusive, not to separate peoples. I don't agree with borders and national borders, especially in Africa, because they're artificial. They were created by Europeans, you know what I'm saying? So it's a huge task, but we need to start having dialogue and creating ideas around, you know, repatriation, and about just having sort of international links with Africa in a way that will benefit Africa and the diaspora. Not, we're gonna go back, so we're taking our land back off you. We are one people, you know what I mean? We have different tones and skin tones and ethnic heritages, but you know, in the same way that you can have sort of a unified Europe or a unified different parts of Asia, you know what I mean? The same way we need to have a unified African outlook, and then, you know what I mean, in the bigger scheme of things, have a unified human outlook on the world. That's the most important thing for me, but it's a long way off at the moment from the place we're at the minute. So yeah, that's my heritage, you know what I mean? Africa via Grenada, via London, you get me?